Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my August books for you. Hooray! I'm filming this on the 3rd of September, which must be some kind of record for how quickly I've turned that around. But you actually won't be seeing it until kind of mid-August because I only just uploaded my July books videos. Although all of you guys who do love the book videos assure me it's never overkill. Not everyone loves them. I am feeling a little bit tired this afternoon, hence the tea. I've actually got sugar in it. I've actually been trying to wean myself off sugar in my tea and I've been doing a good job. Just occasionally I need that little bit of extra energy. I put this jumper on because it's kind of, I was feeling a bit cozy and chilly today, but now it's making me too hot. But anyway, we've got a very sizable stack this month, so I'm going to show you it briefly. I've just organised it for a picture. Ta-da! So yeah, we've got some big books in there as well. Finally, kind of, this is how much I should be reading a month if I want to meet my goals, but obviously I was kind of away for a lot of August, so I had a lot more time to read. And similarly to last month, because I read quite a lot of them on a sunbed, I do not have such detailed notes. My reviews may be a little bit threadbare. Anything else to tell you guys before we get started? I also haven't written my reviews on for my blog yet, so again, that usually means that my mind's a bit more all over the place. So for next month's book club, I have picked The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. She is the author of The God of Small Things, which I read and loved a long time ago now, and I know that lots of you guys love that novel as well. I don't think this one is supposed to be as good. We are getting pretty limited on the shelf. I was up there a minute ago and I was kind of proud of myself how limited the selection is becoming, because it means that I am maybe on the track to finishing all those unread books. This is what I picked. My copy looks huge, but I have got the large print version. I kind of accidentally bought it, so I don't think it's actually as big as it looks. And hopefully I will get that up for you guys first week of October. So you don't have loads of time to read it if you do want to join in, but I need to kind of start catching up with these book videos. So on to last month's book club book. I can never say that first time round. I always mess it up and have to re-say it. This is Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Lots of you guys seemed excited to read this one. You had it on your shelves or you'd read Calvino before, and I really hope you enjoyed it if you did read it. So Invisible Cities is an odd book. So the framing narrative is that the whole book is taking place as a kind of conversation between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, both of which are obviously historical figures. Marco Polo really did work for him, I think, from what I have gathered. Marco Polo being an Italian merchant and explorer from Venice. Sorry, just reading that straight off the Wikipedia page, but my brain is not working today. So they had a real relationship, but there are lots of anachronistic details in the framing narrative. It's not very historical in that sense. It's much more theoretical and fictional and kind of imagined. But anyway, that's the framing device for the whole book. But most of the book is taken up with Polo's meditations on various different cities. They're not actual cities, they're not cities that you could kind of pinpoint. They're kind of like meditations on the idea of a city, various different styles of city, and so the whole thing is kind of directed towards understanding cities and how they come to exist and what they mean, basically. Which I'm sure that anyone who's done English literature has probably been forced to think about the city as an entity. This is probably one of the best city books I've ever read. I know that people are going to get crazy about Joyce if I say that. I don't like Joyce very much. And then he sorts his cities into kind of categories. There's like thin cities, which in some cases are just like the water pipes of a city, and he describes those and what those mean to a city and how they kind of connect and make the city what it is. Or various other different networks tends to be kind of a strong theme. Cities and the Dead is another category, which is really interesting. He imagines various different like necropolises, that's definitely not how you say it, but like there's one city in which underneath the ground there's like a second city where everyone who dies gets put in there doing the same things that they did in life. So it's like a mirrored death version of the city. And there's various different kind of alternatives to that. Anyway, I'm not explaining them very well, but through this we really get some interesting theoretical ideas about the space and place of a city and the life of a city, which is something I'm particularly interested in at the moment for various reasons. Things are coming together in my brain. So it really, yeah, it worked really nicely with what I'm currently thinking about. It's very postmodern. I said it would really go well with Deleuze and Guattari. If you are doing any theory, then you will probably know those names. It's all about kind of like desire and the networking of cities and how all of that works, and I think this book would go really well with them if you're looking for a book that would go well with them. But yeah, it kind of becomes almost like speculative fiction. All these meditations kind of take a different aspect of the city and have a look at it and make it real, sometimes like physical, other times just thinking about the concepts themselves. And kind of one of the major quotes of this book is that Kublai Khan asks Marco Polo why he never describes Venice to him, and Marco Polo says, every time I talk about a city I'm talking about Venice. So that's kind of one of those things about this book that everyone kind of relates the cities involved back to Venice, but I do think there's a lot more going on than that. Yeah, like I said, there's some anachronistic stuff, so it's not all about the period in which Marco Polo and Kublai Khan actually lived. Like, there's concerns about globalization and the kind of repetition of the same city, the same suburbs over and over again. So I really liked it. It's kind of a piece of theory wrapped up in fiction, which is something I enjoy in small doses, and this is just one perfect small dose. You could get through it in an afternoon, like I said before, and but it's quite fulfilling in its own way, in different ways from other short books. The descriptions of the city, I haven't even mentioned this, but the writing is extremely beautiful, really brings them to life in your mind. It's very rich and atmospheric, and obviously it's kind of also about the human condition and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. Obviously this is translated from Italian, if you didn't know. It's not originally written in English, and I would definitely be interested in reading his other work. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think it's one of those things which could introduce you to a whole new world of ideas in quite an enjoyable way. So yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this one as much as I did. I've described it really badly as always, but if you want to think about the idea of a city, then I would definitely recommend this one. So back to thinking about things in order. So next up we've got The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa, and this is also translated Italian. So this is about an aristocrat in Sicily during the Risorgimento. Terrible Italian accent. So basically when Italy was being unified from a bunch of kind of separate kingdoms. So the protagonist of this book, The Leopard, so I'm just going to sit back a moment, you guys, because of my back. So the protagonist of this book is one of those, well, technically royal families. He's a prince during that period of time when it's the shift from the old system to the new system, and about how he's kind of dealing with that decline in his importance and the rise of the middle class and, you know, the professional class. It's a historical novel. It was written in the 50s, but it's set around 1860. It's lavish. It really describes the world of the Leopard, or the Prince of Salina, really, really well, and I find that very interesting. I think the thing that I liked about this book was that kind of historical element to it, because it's not a period of time I particularly know a lot about. So mortality is obviously a big theme because it's about the kind of passing of one regime to a new one. Things I didn't like about it was a bit sexist. I kind of expected it, but yeah, it's a little bit sexist. It's also kind of, it depends whether you're interested in, you know, the decline of nobility, if that's something that you could kind of get involved with. If it's not, then I kind of understand. But yeah, in general, I enjoyed this read. It had good atmosphere, but I wouldn't say you need to rush to read it. It wasn't like my favourite thing in the world. But I found it interesting, and I know a little bit more about that period of time now. Right, next up we have A Necessary Evil by Abir Mukherjee. This is the second novel following the one that we talked about last month, which was A Rising Man, following Captain Sam Wyndham, I think he's called, yep, as he investigates his next crime, basically. So they're historical crime fiction or historical mystery fiction or thrillers or whatever you want to call them. It's set in colonial Calcutta, although in this one Wyndham travels to the kingdom of Sambalpur investigating the assassination of a Maharaja's son, so another prince. I thought this one was good, fast-paced again, interesting, action-packed, kept me reading. So if you like kind of historical crime fiction, then I think you would enjoy this. Like I said last time, it is willing to discuss race and colonialism in a kind of open way, and also in this one there's a bit more female influence, which is always good. So there's a bit of kind of frank discussion about that as well. Nothing groundbreaking, but enjoyable nonetheless. Next up we have Pnin. I don't know if I'm saying that right. This is the second Nabokov novel I have ever read. I really want to read the rest of his work. But yeah, I've obviously read Lolita. This is the second one that I've read. It's a very short little book about a Russian professor living in America, and basically it's about him bumbling around, getting himself into scrapes because he doesn't speak perfect English, and it describes all of his little idiosyncrasies, all of his little foibles, the funny things that happen to him, and you kind of learn to love him because of the way he is. He's obviously somewhat alienated from the culture around him, and you obviously come to kind of pity him as well, and his failed interactions with other people. Sometimes his successful ones, but yeah, his kind of failed romantic efforts and that kind of thing. Some people have a problem with this book because it doesn't have a plot. I quite like it as a kind of set of almost vignettes about his life. I just thought it was really, really funny, endlessly endearing, and of course Nabokov's writing is crazy. It's so good. I think lots of people talk about Nabokov and say, how can he write such good English, because obviously it's not his first language, in case you didn't know, he is Russian. But I think the reason he writes such good English is because he's Russian and he has a whole new perspective on the language, and he just does the craziest things with it, and I'm always in awe of his writing. I find it so hard to describe though. I don't know where to begin with it. Yeah, it's just like skewed slightly. It just comes in from a different angle. In this particular book, it really works to add to the comedic effect. I sometimes cannot say that word, but yeah, I really, really liked it. It's not such tangled language as Lolita. There's not so many references to other things, and you know, the slipping and tripping of words and all of that kind of stuff that you get in Lolita. It is a little bit more kind of straightforward. Not super straightforward because it's still Nabokov, but it is more straightforward. And then there's the narrator, who I don't really fully understand. I feel like I need to reread this book. I probably do, because I don't fully understand the role of the narrator, but something's going on there which adds kind of a layer of complexity to this, what otherwise would be kind of like a sweet short book about a Russian man living in America and getting himself into trouble. So it adds a kind of Nabokovian layer of complexity. That's definitely not the right use of his name, but yeah, it adds a little bit, it kind of elevates it a bit. I don't know what's going on with the narrator though, so don't quote me on that, but something is happening with the narrator. But yeah, ultimately it's a tragi-comedy, I would say, because it's, you know, it's heart-wrenching and you kind of really feel for Timothy Pnin, and I think it's well worth a read, so I really, really enjoyed it. Not much I didn't like about this one, so highly recommend it. So next we have a book that I'm kind of undecided on. I think I really like it. It's not quite as bad as The Inheritors by Golding, where I kind of talked about how it's really an achievement, that book, but it's really unenjoyable to read. This one, I didn't find it as unenjoyable. It's got a similarly unique and slightly crazy narrative style, which makes it quite an interesting one to read. It's The Famished Road by Ben Okri. It won the Booker in 1991. So it kind of bills itself as a fantasy novel. So the protagonist is a bhikkhu, or a spirit child. So a spirit child is essentially a child that kind of keeps coming back, dying, I think it's before the age of 12 is the technical time, and then returning to those same parents but dying before they reach puberty, essentially. And Azaro is a spirit child who has decided to cling on to the world. So he kind of has one foot in the door, and the other half of him is still in the spirit world and able to interact with and see spirits. It's set in Nigeria. It's kind of set around, I think it's just after independence, but there is a bit of confusion there. Sometimes it seems to be just after, sometimes it seems to be just before. So it's about a country in transition and kind of the birth of a new era, and Azaro kind of obviously representing that, and his story can obviously be seen as an allegory for the country as a whole. So I said it was a hallucinogenic prequel to the likes of Marlon James. This novel is really crazy. So this book is not a stream of consciousness, but it almost reads like one. So we see everything from Azaro's point of view, and he's constantly seeing spirits and they're constantly appearing to him, and lots of it seems quite arbitrary. I'm sure if you were to analyse it, though, you would get a lot from it. But, you know, a spirit with 3 green eyes and 4 legs will turn up and then disappear, and then the next thing will happen, and then the next thing will happen. It's quite repetitive and cyclical, I think on purpose, because it seems to be about the unrelenting nature of poverty, the poverty that Azaro and his family and his community live in. Obviously that can make for sometimes a slightly frustrating reading experience. I said it's not really got many of the narrative or plotting features of traditional books. Azaro doesn't really describe his inner life, you don't get a lot of that. It's like pure constant observation and action. Nonetheless, there are some parts that are really moving, but it means that the book manages to get away from poverty or torture porn, which I thought was quite a unique way of doing that, and also quite important. But yeah, obviously the kind of fantastical elements of the novel reflect the kind of crazy violence of the real elements of it. But yeah, I couldn't really describe to you a particular plot because it's so kind of crazy and goes kind of all over the place. But yeah, sometimes you kind of get into it and it becomes hypnotic and you kind of get into the flow of it and it really works, and then the next thing will happen and it kind of jolts you out of it. And I think all of this is intentional, and I think it works because of what Okri is trying to do. I am really glad I read it, but I would again proceed at your own risk with this one. It's a little bit tough to get through, but I do think it is rewarding. And if you're interested in Nigerian literature or African literature more generally, I think that this kind of important moment in the history of that literature, so is kind of worth reading for that reason as well. And Okri really experiments in this novel, and I think that's really great. And then yeah, there's some great, I'm just looking at the pages I've turned down, there's actually some great quotes in here as well. I just think, yeah, you should maybe do it in small doses, because I read it I think over the course of 2.5 days, and it was a lot. So possibly one of those ones you should kind of dip in and out of to really fully appreciate all the slight differences between the kind of cycles that go on in the book. But yeah, so that is The Famished Road. So I obviously read this book straight after I read The Famished Road, and it was some really nice kind of lighter relief from the heaviness of The Famished Road. And this is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. This is historical fiction. It's kind of Dickensian, sort of. It's about a young girl who grows up in London among petty thieves, it says on the back, or fingersmiths, hence the title. She's an orphan, she's kind of taken in. Yeah, it's 1860s again. She takes part in a scheme to help her friend defraud another young girl in the countryside of her inheritance. This book has a few twists and turns. It's fast paced, it's really like a proper page turner, or at least it was for me. It's really readable and fun. It's very atmospheric, it really creates London in the Victorian era, and yeah, all of that is just really entertaining. Yeah, it's kind of like a feminist take on Victorian literature. It's a feminist take on the madness theme, and all of that at the same time, which elevates it. Not much not to like about this book. It's not the most groundbreaking book in the world, but it is so worth the read for Waters' kind of look at Victorian fiction through like a queer feminist viewpoint. It's just really like a satisfying, good read, and I will definitely be reading the rest of her work as well, just because this made a really good summer novel, something to read on the sunbed. I thought this was the perfect book. I picked some rather random things to read during my summer holidays, but this one really worked for me and was so much fun. So I would highly recommend this one just for like a good solid satisfying read. Yeah, it says on the front, one of the best storytellers alive today, which I think she is just a great storyteller. I've got a Kindle read which I finally finished. I think I started it in December of last year. I read on my Kindle when I kind of don't have a book to hand, and I finished all the books I took out with me to Corfu. So I finished up The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu. I'm so not saying that right, but it is the middle book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, which is translated from the Chinese. I don't have loads of notes on this one because I don't write them in my notebook, but it's basically a continuation of how great the first novel was. I think it was probably better actually. If you don't know, it's essentially about what happens when Earth comes into contact with an aggressive alternative life form in the universe who is much more advanced technologically. So this novel builds on the first novel, which was kind of just about finding that out. Sorry, I've spoiled it. So this one is kind of about how humans deal with that. You know, they're going to arrive in 400 years and how humans prepare or don't prepare for their arrival. It's truly great. It's super scientific, but it's also human, and it also explores philosophy. So it is hard science fiction, but it's got a very human level to it as well. It's endlessly interesting and enjoyable. Yeah, and the way he's thought through everything is amazing. I would highly recommend it. I wish I could read the third one quicker, but I am obviously concentrating on my physical copies of books at the moment because I'm trying to get through them. But I really liked it. I wish I could read the physical copy, but I'm not allowed to buy any books. Looking forward to finishing the last one. I think I'm already like halfway through the last one anyway. Right. I feel like we've got so many books left still. So next up we've got Neuromancer by William Gibson. Another one I was really conflicted about. This is like the cyberpunk novel. It started the movement, I think. I'm sorry if I'm wrong on that one. And he coined the term cyberspace in this book. It's very like stylish cyberpunk thriller. I don't really want to use this word because I don't believe in it, but it is masculine. It's very like, it's like reading Blade Runner, which obviously was inspired by this book, so that's why. What to say about this? Lots of people have said it's all style, no substance. I kind of felt that, and it's really sticky to read. Like, it's just, sometimes it reads as pure jargon. Sometimes it's nice when books are like cinematic in scope, but this one is just too much, and I don't know. I don't know if it's the type of narrative that I kind of necessarily love, but there are moments of genius thinking about artificial intelligence, music, capitalism, the Matrix, late capitalism. There are moments in here where I can see why it became such a kind of cultural phenomenon, but as a read, for me personally, I didn't enjoy it because I just thought the style of it is irritating. It's kind of choppy and disjointed and kind of trying to be glamorous, sometimes failing, sometimes getting it. And yeah, it's just not really for me. But yeah, I don't think I'll be reading any more William Gibson. But again, I am glad I read it because I do quite enjoy watching cyberpunk films. I'm just not sure I enjoy reading them. He's just not really for me. And again, almost like The Inheritors, because I don't fully understand what the jargon is or what it is Gibson's describing. It took me a while sometimes to work out kind of even where I was. Like, I was so disorientated when it came to like what he was actually describing. There are some moments of genius, but yeah, won't be reading any more Gibson anytime soon. Next we have Death and the Penguin, which is by a Ukrainian author. It's about a man in Kiev. It's about kind of like lonely middle-aged man who lives with his penguin becomes suddenly employed writing obituaries for people kind of in advance, like before they've died, for a local paper. It's a satire about Soviet life, the isolation of that life, the problem of sustaining close relationships. It's quiet, it's understated, it is funny in its satire. It can also be moving and sweet. It's certainly not flowery in any way. It's quite spare writing. I won't ruin it for you guys, but yeah, there's something sinister happening that slowly gets revealed. As a protagonist, Victor is not very likeable, but that's okay because it's really made up for in the cast of characters he ends up surrounding himself with. But although I imagine that would irritate some people, but yeah, I enjoyed this, like a solid 3 out of 5 read. There's things going on in there, it's enjoyable, it's readable, but I wouldn't say it was a favourite. Next we've got Abeng by Michelle Cliff. I wrote my first dissertation on 3 books, one of which was Michelle Cliff's No Telephone to Heaven, which is actually the sequel to this book. I think she wrote this one second though, I think. It's about a kind of Michelle Cliff-esque girl, it's kind of semi-autobiographical, growing up in Jamaica. She is privileged, she comes from a middle-class family and she's light-skinned as well, and which affords her another level of privilege also. It's about Claire growing up. It kind of definitely explores Claire's navigation of her privilege and the way she exercises it as well. There's some interesting bits about Jamaica's history in here about the Maroons. It's more readable than No Telephone to Heaven, I would say. It's slightly less complex and a little bit more straightforward. Cliff's description of Jamaica is really evocative, draws you into the book. So for a short book, it kind of gripped me. So yeah, I liked this one. Again, I wouldn't say you must read it, but worth reading if any of those kind of elements appeal to you. Next up, we've got The Call of the Toad by Günter Grass. This is a book that I wish I'd put down because I really didn't enjoy it, and I don't know why I pushed myself through it because, as I've said recently, I'm trying to get better at putting books down that I'm just not getting on with. This was one of them. I know it's a bit of an odd Grass novel to start with. Apparently, I will be trying some other books by him, but this is the one that my dad gave me. So this is from his collection. So it was on my shelf, so I read it. It's about 2 people in Poland, one German, one Polish, who decide to start a business whereby they can basically bury the dead in their kind of place of origin. So this is in Dansk, or in German Danzig. So after the war, the Germans were basically exiled from that place. So kind of the main thrust of this business will be burying Germans in Dansk. I think it's set in the 90s, I think. It's about burgeoning capitalism in formerly Soviet Unionized Poland, and it's, yeah, satire on business and how it's kind of taken to extremes, and this simple idea becomes kind of goes out of their control and starts just being about profit. It's also about their relationship, and in general I just find it really slow. It's very businessy, and there was just not enough here for me to really enjoy. Like, I like the idea of the themes, I even kind of like the concept of the storyline as well, but I don't know, the writing style wasn't for me. It was almost a little bit convoluted sometimes. Don't know if that's because of the translation from the German, which is possible, but it just seemed a little bit, it's kind of written, because it's satirical, it's kind of written at a distance, obviously, as most satire is. While Death of the Penguin kind of knew when to zoom in and when to come out, and had a greater subtlety to it, this one's a little bit too, I don't know whether it's on the nose or it's too detailed, or it's too focused on the business. I don't know what it is, but I did not love it or get on with it. Next we have the final Marlon James book that I haven't read, which is John Crow's Devil, even though actually this is the first book he wrote, I believe. This is set in 50s Jamaica. It's essentially about two warring pastors, and about good and evil, and about desire, inherited trauma, masculinity, religious mania, queer desire, kind of small communities and secrets and all of that kind of stuff. It's very evocative, very rich in atmosphere. It's very violent, which is kind of classic of Marlon James, and very passionate almost. It kind of jumps off the page. It's a very lively book. It's confident, accomplished writing, which is full of life, I said. It's got good plotting and pacing. I said it was a dark, twisted page turner. It's not as strong as his other work in terms of its ideas or concepts, which is fair enough. It's his first book. But I think there are things happening, as I said, about religion and stuff. I think worth reading if you're interested in James and you kind of want to see where he started. But I wouldn't say in and of itself, unless any of those things particularly appeal to you, that you need to read it. It's kind of like The Crucible, but set in Jamaica. James's language is much more straightforward here than it is in his later novels, but it is still very rich, as I said, and very evocative. And he has a really great talent for creating characters and tensions as well. So that is John Crow's Devil, and now we're on to our final book, which is good because I have to leave. This is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. This is a proof copy which I received back in 2018 when this book was actually published, so I'm obviously well behind in reading it and reviewing it. This is set in Georgian England. It is not as fantastical as the title would have you think. It's mostly kind of creating Georgian England. It's about a trader, I don't quite know what to call him, who receives into his possession a kind of wizened looking mummified mermaid, which he presents to Georgian London. And it's also about a prostitute who is trying to come back into society after having been in a relationship with I think it's a count or something who's just died, so she's trying to represent herself to society. And it's about all the things that kind of come out of that. It takes a long time to kind of get to the point, this book, but it's kind of worth getting there. It's I really thought that she wrote Georgian London really well, and I was interested to see what would happen throughout. The last 100 pages really elevated it for me because it suddenly has a bit more meaning once she finally kind of gets to the point of the book. The idea of the mermaid and women and their sexuality all kind of comes together. It makes for kind of a more interesting novel for me anyway. But it isn't, yeah, it's engaging throughout. There are a few loose ends that I'm kind of like, what's happening? And I think some things are handled a little bit clumsily. But in general, it was a really enjoyable read, and I think if you like historical novels, then you'll really like Gower's narration and storyline, and I think you'll really find that interesting. So yeah, I enjoyed this more than I thought I would because, I don't know, the title kind of put me off it a little bit, but I ended up enjoying it. Anyway, you guys, that is everything. I have to rush off. Thank you for watching today. Hope that you enjoyed. We'll see how many books I come back with in September. I hope that you enjoy The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and yeah, I will see you again very soon. Bye.